Select Board. I am Mo Handel, Board Chair. This open meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded, and anything shared or stated will be a matter of public record. All supporting meeting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website, www.needhamma.gov, unless otherwise noted. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be a public participation unless required by law, and this particular meeting will not include public comment. First, we'll confirm that all members of the Select Board are present. Mr. Matthews?
Here.
Ms. Cooley?
Here.
Mr. Bullion?
Here.
Mr. Borelli?
Here.
Thank you. As a first order of business, I would ask for a motion that this meeting will be continued to the board's next meeting on Tuesday. Can somebody remind me of the date?
February 2nd.
February 2nd. Thank you.
February
February 8th.
8th, 9th.
Wait, oh, that's right. Sorry. I'm thinking next Tuesday.
All right, as a first
February
order
9th.
of business, I would ask for a motion that this meeting will be continued to the board's next meeting of Tuesday, February 9th.
So moved.
In the event of a technical problem. Thank you. The motion's been made and seconded.
That was almost a very fast meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, there you go. Ms. Cool,
Aye.
Mr. Matthews,
Aye.
Mr. Borelli,
Aye.
Mr. Bullion,
Aye.
and the chair votes yes, the ayes have it. The first item on our agenda is to close the public hearing for the change of control for the RCN Telecom Services of Massachusetts LLC, and we have received responses to the inquiry, the questions that were given to the proponent, and a vote will be taken on February 23rd. So that will be our second meeting in February. There were no public comments other than the answers to the inquiry. So that concludes this item, and that brings us to the next item. Town manager is going to be presenting us with the budget. Kate, the floor is yours. Welcome, Dave.
Mr. Chair, we're going to show a PowerPoint, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. This is the balanced budget for fiscal year 22. We're showing some of, can you go back, Sandy? Thanks. We're showing some of the examples of what an interesting year it's been with our two chiefs getting their vaccinations in the same space where we held our emergency operations center in some of the dark days in early 2020. And a really fantastic picture of the town meeting, the first town meeting on June 8th that was taken by our public works employees. So, Mr. Chair, our budget this year is titled Uncertainty and the Now Normal, because we keep talking about normal and the new normal, but really there's only going to be a now normal for quite a while yet. We don't know what's going to happen, and we can only be pretty much sure of the next week ahead. In the development of this budget and the budget presentation, we've been thinking a lot about our priorities for racial equity and being a diverse community and a welcome community, as well as our effort to continue to respond to the pandemic and to move out of it. And so I have two quotes for you that guided the development of this budget. The first was by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1965 here in Boston, where he said, "Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy. Now is the time to make brotherhood a reality. Now is the time." And the second quote really struck me, and I think you can think about it in any number of ways, and I'm not the first to, even in our esteemed circle here, to quote the amazing Amanda Gorman. But I thought this piece was particularly relevant for our pandemic, where she said, "So while once we asked how we could possibly prevail over catastrophe, now we assert how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us." I think the tenor of our budget really has to do with how we've made it through the first year almost, and the worst part of the pandemic we're sure of. And the budget document that you'll receive includes a lot more detail in the budget message about each department, and in the balance of the book about the revenue and the submissions of each department. And it also includes some pull-out stories of the work that our departments have been doing on a remote basis. And I highly recommend that you take a look at that. Sandy? So our budget priorities in pulling together both this presentation and the budget come from the budget priorities that were set by the board. Recovering from the pandemic, getting our schools open, getting our staff open, getting the public vaccinated are our highest priorities. Prioritizing in-school learning to the extent the schools believe it's possible. At the same time, we're working very hard, as many of you are, advancing our racial equity agenda. We've prioritized building maintenance on the ground and in the budget. We're continuing to manage through the fiscal crisis, as we'll talk about moving forward. Many of you on this Zoom are working very hard to support our local businesses, as our staff are. And we have spent the last year and a half prioritizing formal communication structures, particularly through the creation of our PIO and the combination of that with our website. So those are the priorities that guided the development of the budget. So the budget in brief, this document is included in your printed version, and it will be online, but basically this chart shows the sources and uses. So our revenue is up 4.9% over FY21, but you can see if you move the pictures of us on the top instead of on the side, you'll be able to see, now you can, that only the estimate for property tax is up. All of the other categories for revenue, we're expecting a reduction at this point in the budget cycle. You can also see that in the total uses, again, the budget has to be balanced so that the expenses are up by 4.9%. I think what's notable here, and what is, in my view, one of the major reasons that we've been able to balance this budget in such a difficult period, is that the major categories of spending, municipal departments, the public schools, and our townwide expenses are all below our historical revenue estimate target. So in a year when we really needed this to happen, it is happening. I would note at the very bottom of the chart, and we're going to talk about this several times during the presentation, we are proposing that the COVID expenses that have been identified by Public Works, Public Health, and the public schools be funded through federal, state grants and reserves. Sandy. The general fund revenue source chart we show every year in order to give the public and the board a sense of how the revenue is allocated amongst the categories. And you can see that we're estimating in FY22 that the property tax will be 82.2% of the revenue used to fund the operating budget. It is true that in the initial estimate of revenue at this very early stage, the property tax tends to be the revenue source that we're most confident on, and it tends to be a higher portion of the total. And as the year goes on and the actual budget numbers are known, it gets closer to what you'll see there for the actual FY20 of typically for us in Needham in the high 78% range. Sandy? This is only the first of Officer Rocket's appearances in the PowerPoint presentation. You see, it's a source of great comfort for children and staff alike. So the major categories of state aid that we're following are the Chapter 70 school aid and the unrestricted general government aid. We are assuming that Chapter 70 school aid will be flat. We had some conversation very early about whether this number should be reduced, but we believe based on statements by Lieutenant Governor and the Governor that they are likely to propose a Chapter 70 school aid that is at least equal to what we received in FY21. We're not so sanguine about FY22 unrestricted general government aid, and we're showing a 12.5% reduction in that category. Again, as we say every year, we're talking in January, the budget is nowhere near done. And so we continue to refine these up to town meeting and even after that. So the key budget drivers we talk about every year, enrollment, employee benefits, and staffing. This is also a story where FY22 is a little bit of an anomaly where the budget drivers aren't driving significant increases in the budget. School enrollment is actually down. It's down for the second year in a row, although the last school year to the school year before that was a very small reduction, but there's a fairly significant reduction of approximately 212 students in the current school year. We have the schools will be continuing to monitor what that means for FY22. We don't know that, and they're budgeting assuming the student enrollment will change. But in terms of year over year enrollment increases, this is something that's different for FY22. We do have, over the last 10-year period, we still show a 16% enrollment growth, and that is consistent with some of the western and northern suburbs, and so it's a practice that we're going to have to be following. Similarly with employee benefits, we've made changes to our health insurance plans, and the employee benefits line was, as submitted, was only about 1% over FY21. It's up slightly higher than that because we increased the employee benefits line in response to any FTE or headcount increase that we have recommended. And there, with respect to staffing, there have been some years where there's been significant staffing related to typically enrollment growth or other service delivery needs. This year, the total increase in full-time equivalents for the schools is 7.95, which is actually significantly less than it's been in the last several years. And in the municipal side, it's a net of 3.3 positions. So the budget drivers picture for FY22 is actually positive for us, and it's a helpful way that we're able to present to you this balanced budget. So there are several performance budget increases that we will propose to you and to the Finance Committee and Town Meeting. The first two, group insurance and retirement assessments, are the allocations that we calculate when any department submits increases in headcount. We calculate increases in carrying costs or overhead costs and put them in the group insurance and retirement retirement insurance assessments. Our budget, the select board budget, and the office of the town manager is increasing fairly significantly FY22 over FY21 for two reasons. The first is that we have recommended the transfer of the economic development manager from the planning and community development department to the office of the town manager and select board. That's merely a transfer, so there's no increase in FTEs or cost or even benefits. It's become an operational benefit for us to have that position seated or eventually physically seated in town hall. And the other piece is the formalization of the public information officer position into the operating budget as opposed to the warrant article where it was an initial pilot program. And we strongly recommend, for many reasons that the board is well aware, and as you have agreed to include in your list of budget priorities, that it is something that the community has grown to rely on, as have staff, as have elected and appointed board members, and it's something we would very much like to continue. I would note that you'll notice that the PowerPoint has significantly improved this year over last, and that's another formalization of our communication strategy. Performance budget item in fire, there's a request for a replacement of an aging striker chair. This is a chair that the fire department uses for patients with limited mobility when they're carrying them downstairs. In the library, we are recommending that some digital subscription services be incorporated into the operating budget. These are the Overdrive and Overdrive Advantage and WorldCat services that the library has traditionally funded through state aid. Given that we're not recommending, we're not estimating, we would recommend, we're not estimating any library aid from the Commonwealth in FY22. And given that these services have become critical for many who are homebound, we do think that these digital services should be included in the operating budget. With respect to the Department of Public Works, we're recommending a few changes. The first is to create another project manager position that would support particularly building maintenance. We found that over the past years, there are so many projects that happen in building maintenance, many of them concentrated in the summer, but they certainly go all year, that even with the addition of the assistant director of building maintenance, who will be doing overseeing staff and putting those programs together, a project manager to oversee individual projects in the something like 1 million square foot of buildings that we now operate is a high priority for us and for the department. We're also proposing, based on the number of square footage that's being added in the next year, a new plumber position and an initiative that Interim Director of Public Works, Karis Lustig, is promoting, which is to create in the general fund 3 co-op positions through likely Northeastern University in order to bring young folks into the departments and perhaps get them interested in public service and getting promoted. And we think that's a great way to staff up those departments and grow new talent. And finally, in Park and Recreation, you'll recall that there was a warrant article to fund lifeguards and summer pool items. We're incorporating those into the operating budget. And then there's additional staffing for the pools that the department has determined are necessary for the safe operation. And then there's funding in there for opening and closing the pool, which had been insufficient in the past. So those are the total of the essentially programs that are in addition to those that we're operating today. Sandy, thank you. There are several changes to submitted budgets. The first is that we have recommended that the reserve fund be level funded at its FY21 amount. The Finance Committee will be looking at their request for reserve fund and take a look at the recommendation that we've proposed. Also, in building design and construction, we're proposing the elimination of 2 full-time equivalent positions, given the current status of a number of projects that we have approved and funded. We do expect that in the future, staffing would be increased in this department, either through the operating budget or through the projects, because it will be very lean for a time, but we think that's appropriate for FY22 and likely 23. But when the next major projects come on board, the value proposition to the town of having owners project managers on board, on staff, has been proven, and we think that's important. We are proposing to transfer a position from building design and construction into the Department of Public Works to create a seamless transition on that position. And finally, with respect to Health and Human Services, we have proposed a reduction of about $40,000 to the Veterans Services Department for 2 reasons. One is that we have petitioned the Commonwealth to expand the district to include the town of Westwood, which may be no surprise to anyone that the town of Westwood might have an interest in joining our Veterans District. And we also have built up a reserve within the town of Wellesley for the benefits that we provide directly to veterans, and the number of clients has been fairly low. So for FY22, we believe that we have a sufficient balance not to have to increase those benefits, and expanding the district really helps everybody. So with respect to the Needham Public Schools, we discussed the fact that enrollment is a little bit in flux, and the schools will be grappling with what to expect in the fall as hopefully the pandemic subsides. But as the board is aware, there is no approved vaccine for children in the younger grades, and what will be needed for socially distancing the schools in the fall is going to continue to evolve. As we mentioned, the number of FTEs for the schools for their level service is 7.95. In the COVID-related expense, if they have to carry the hybrid, the social distancing, the limited busing, space on busing, and the fully remote academy, if all of those things come to pass, the schools find a need for 26 additional FTEs, and what turns out to be in the high 3 millions with benefits. And in building maintenance, just to recognize that our building maintenance department has spent most of its human and almost all of its financial resources to support getting the schools open and get the air exchanges and the HVAC work done. And so just a recognition of how much support for the Needham Public Schools is contained in the building maintenance department, which is not in the school budget. Sandy. Not much new here with sewer and water. I would note that we're also proposing a co-op program student in water. Finding licensed water treatment employees is a struggle nationwide. And so trying to entice folks to come in and learn the business and perhaps stay is something that would be very good for our succession planning. And for both the sewer and the water, we have in our proposed budget level funded the MWRA assessment, but there is reason to believe that the assessments will be up in both cases. They're particularly in water where residents have been, many residents have been home all day, every day since March. There's been more water use on the domestic side and less water use on the commercial side. Sandy. Just a few notes on other items. The sewer budget contains an allocation for drains because it's operationally better for us to fund it in that enterprise fund, and then we transfer the amount that we spend on drains back to the operating budget, back to the sewer budget. And so just a reminder that we've tabled it now twice, but we do believe that a dedicated funding source for stormwater and water quality does need to be identified, and we will be bringing that back to the board. We don't have a date for that yet, but we do believe that that's something that we need to at least begin planning for. The Athletic Facility Improvement Fund, we have a practice of funding that fund with receipts that we receive for field use. So field use fees go half to the field revolving fund and half to administrative fees. And so our practice has been to match that amount. This is the 4-year average of those fees we're proposing to put into the Athletic Facility Improvement Fund. And the goal there would be to build the fund back up. As you know, we had a big subtraction from the fund when we did the DeFazio Memorial Park complexes, but we'd like to build it back up because in 10 years we'll have to do it again. And our workers' compensation internal fund was below our target, and so we recommend that we fund that amount and about $337,000. And then just let the board know that our allowance for abatements and exemptions at this time stands just under $2 million. So the other item that we are waiting for our final certification of free cash. We expect it to be between 12 and 16 million. The budget plan that we've proposed to you assumes 12.5 million. So there is some float if the free cash gets certified higher. But with that 12 million assumption, it's higher than we were assuming when we proposed the capital plan for your vote in December. So we have recommended that additional items in the capital plan that had been funded through tier 2 be brought forward into the capital budget for town meeting. And that includes the balance of the public works infrastructure, some message boards that had been delayed, school furniture was delayed, library technology, and 2 trucks, pretty large trucks, Unit 10 and Unit 39, which are heavy duty trucks in the DPW arsenal. There are a number of financial warrant articles for your consideration. The first being the building maintenance program, where we have significantly increased this number because there have been so many more projects, and we do expect that a lot of the work that we have done in retro commissioning the schools will need to continue, that there need to be continued work, and that there needs to be continued additional work on those systems. And then we have a lot of other projects that this year, at least to date, have gotten delayed, so we'll need to catch up. Our traditional compensated absences article to build the fund back up. As you know, some groups of employees have a buyback of sick leave at retirement, and all employees are entitled to payback of vacation. That's on the books when they leave town service. Decommissioning the Rosemary Lake Dam, we'll have some the DPW folks come in and make a presentation to you before town meeting. This is an interesting one in which the Commonwealth frankly insists that Rosemary Lake, the edge of Rosemary Lake that is along Rosemary Street across from the Petrini Park apartments is a high hazard dam. We assert that it's not, but because of this disagreement, we have to file a report on the condition of the dam very regularly. So once and for all, we are planning to hire an engineer to prove that the dam is not actually a dam, and we need the documents to petition the Commonwealth and the DEP to remove it from their list. So this is something that's been a long time coming, and we just need to get that off our plate. Based on the Nuwari work, we are suggesting that there may be funding necessary in the coming year for our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. We're proposing an allocation of $50,000. There's no particular plan for this yet, but we know that having a facilitator at the Nuwari work has been invaluable. We know that we're looking to do more community education. We're planning facilitated conversations. So we think that this article probably could last us a couple years, but it would be a very useful tool for us. With respect to fleet refurbishment, 3 years ago, we proposed this program and expect to bring it back to you every few years. It allows the Department of Public Works to recondition some of its vehicles rather than replacing them. It's been very helpful for them. Our annual NPDES permit compliance, this is the maintenance work with respect to the NPDES and stormwater. There is a corresponding capital program, and this is the work that could also get funded through a stormwater dedicated fund. Planning consulting assistance, we've seen in the last several years projects that come up that are zoning that is proposed that we need work on with respect to either renderings or zoning review or traffic studies or fiscal impact analysis. And it's helpful for planning to have this. It typically lasts them a couple of years. Property tax assistance program. This 50,000 is the number the board approved last year. That's the number we're carrying this year. It's something that you would consider when you finalize the warrant. It had been a $25,000 maximum, and the committee had asked you to raise it to 50, and it seemed, given the situation that we find ourselves in 2021, that might make sense. Public health consulting is another item that we deferred from last year, and an example, or the prime example, for instance, is the Eversource Energy project that we had to find resources to fund experts to help us with that project. And we do think this is something that will be very helpful to the health staff and the Board of Health, because projects typically come to the select board, who turns to the Board of Health, who doesn't have the necessary resources to look them up. And then finally, our small repair grant program was highly successful, and we have now completely allocated those funds, and we would like to have that program start up again. This is a reminder that this is the student mural, the young people's mural that Youth and Family Services helped us to create out on the rail trail. It's a beautiful monument. So just a reminder again on the COVID expenses, we do recommend that they be included in a financial warrant article. They include expenses from Public Works, Public Health, and the public schools. We do think that we have some current state and federal funding. There was an allocation of $900 billion from the Commonwealth, from the federal government in December that hasn't been allocated. It says in the reports that it should have K-12. So we're hoping to use this to fund some of these expenses. And also, we fully expect there to be another stimulus package on the federal level. So the schools and the superintendent have committed to using these federal funds to the extent maximal that we can to fund any expenses related to COVID-19 in the 21-22 school year. So because we don't know those amounts yet, and because it's not impossible that the expenses themselves will go down, we propose that we use the time leading up to town meeting to further refine the amount and the revenue sources for these expenses. So in conclusion, here's our friend Officer Rocket again. When we set up the EOC in March, he was a baby, and now he's a pretty big guy. I saw him last week. In conclusion, again, COVID-19 costs for those departments are going to be something that we'll be talking with all of the boards and committees about leading up to town meeting. Just a note that we have proposed this budget to fund the building maintenance program and the workers' comp internal revenue fund with free cash. If recurring revenue in the form of state aid is high enough, we would propose that those funding sources be turned back over to the operating budget because they are recurring expenses, although we're not uncomfortable using free cash for them. And I think you'll agree that the performance budget has been fairly measured and is targeted toward the budget priorities that the board has identified. I note that Wes Moore, who gave an amazing and I think very effective presentation at the annual MMA annual meeting last week, talked about the critical role that local government plays in being dream protectors, and that in no small way, our boards and committees and staff are ensuring that those who have no one else to look out for them, that we're being the protectors of their dreams. And I could give you just one example. I had 3 Zoom calls today about vaccines and how to make sure that the most vulnerable of our citizens are going to be able to get them. If they're not mobile, they can't go to a testing site, and they don't have a computer. Our staff is just racking their brains every day trying to figure out how to get to those people. And essentially, I just see them as our dream protectors. And then maybe, Mr. Chair, on a little bit of a lighter note, every year since we've been doing this budget since 2006, there's been some mention of an upcoming sporting event. And I think, Sandy, the last hurrah, this is the end of our era. We're not going to blame TB12 for the year we had. There's a lot of emotions on all sides, but even I, who was very unhappy when he left us, is really just in awe of the caliber, and just so glad we had him for so long. But I don't know, Mr. Chair, that we'll be ending our budget with any mention of the Patriots in the Super Bowl in the foreseeing years, but we only hope that would happen. So Sandy, if you could unshare, and I'd be happy to take any questions. I would finally, Mr. Chair, just like to thank everyone here who helped: Katie, Dave, Sandy, Tatiana, and Cindy, who did amazing work in pulling this off. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. And maybe we can assume the title of greatest of all towns to keep the goat alive.
I like that.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It represents a lot of work and effort, especially during these very difficult times. I see Mr. Bullion has his hand up, and I'd like to call on him.
Thank you. Kate, great presentation. I have 2 questions and 1 comment. I'll start with the comment. I do believe that school enrollment is down sharply because I know of a number of families who have moved their children from the public school environment to private schools. Now, what I don't know is whether or not, when this is all done, it will reverse and they will bring their kids back to the public schools. That is still an unknown. So again, that's my comment. Couple of questions. First of all, with respect to property taxes, what is our projection and/or thoughts on the vacancies that we're seeing in downtown Needham Center? And I'm not exactly sure what vacancies exist in the business center or our business districts. How will that impact the commercial property taxes in the next year or 2? And then the second question is, with respect to Chapter 70 funding, I know that we were in line to receive a higher share of Chapter 70 because of the implementation of full-day kindergarten. Have those dollars been realized, and are the numbers that you're showing and/or projecting into account the FDK additional reimbursement from the state due to that implementation?
Okay, I'll start, and then I'll ask Dave to help me. The first is that in addition to private school, the public school district is reporting that there are also many students being homeschooled. And then there's this notion of, because kindergarten is not compulsory in Massachusetts, there's either a delayed or a skipped kindergarten that folks maybe that have, we don't know which it is, but those could be in the queue. With respect to the downtown, I just did want to note that our economic development manager, Amy Halson, is in the process of compiling a list of all vacancies. And so the working group and the board will always be able to be on top of what we're seeing out there. Before I turn it over to Dave to talk about the impact of vacancies on property taxes, the increase in Chapter 70 related to full-day kindergarten was proposed for FY21, but we did receive a lower amount. So we can hope that that would go back up. And I guess, Dave, that would be also for you is the vacancies and then whether you expect the full-day kindergarten amount ever to come back to us.
Okay, I'll take the last part first. We certainly do anticipate funding coming from full-day kindergarten, and in the fact our Chapter 70 estimates before COVID-19 had assumed a substantial increase in Chapter 70 last year. And when we revised the numbers as a result of COVID-19 for FY21, we did assume less money than our original estimate, but we still assumed more money because Needham would be receiving a greater share associated with full-day kindergarten, and that is still true. One of the wild cards associated with Chapter 70 is whether or not the Commonwealth will hold communities harmless relative to the changes in their enrollment for this past year. There, as you would anticipate, there are many school districts that are making that case to the Commonwealth to use the numbers not of this year's October 1 enrollment, but the prior year, given the unique nature of enrollment for this year. But yes, I do anticipate in 23 and out that Chapter 70 will be reflective of full-day kindergarten as well. Relative to property taxes, Needham is still very strong. Construction is still happening in Needham, and that was obvious with the building permit activity. Residential property continues to appreciate. People continue to buy and gravitate to Needham to purchase. There are still bidding wars for real estate in Needham. The commercial sector, of course, is scattered all across the town of Needham, but the core area where the greatest values are in commercial property is going well, and that's in Needham Crossing. Although commercial values are based upon rents, and the large parcels there, the large buildings are under long-term leases, and those leases are the things that factor into those commercial values. We are not anticipating a major change in commercial taxes for fiscal 2022, in part because of the NBC Universal Studio project, and in part because of the phase out of the tax incremental financing agreement with TripAdvisor, both very, very important. On the smaller business side and such, we assume very little growth in that area, and that to be flat. So in short, I do not see a material change in the share of the tax levy that the commercial properties will pay in fiscal 22 in comparison to 21. And lastly, to note in 21, because of the increase in the commercial base and the new growth in the commercial properties, particularly in Needham Crossing, that actually resulted in a lower increase in the residential tax bills this year than what we were discussing just 2 years ago.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions from the board? Mr. Borelli?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you to all to put this budget together. I remember, 6 months ago, people were asking me and all of us about cutting jobs and what are we going to do to reduce expenses. And, we spoke about it on this board and was reminded that we have sustainable budgets for these reasons. You're going to have, we never anticipated this type of dip, but you're going to have these valleys and highs, and our job is really to get through those peaks and valleys. And I think looking at this budget, that's what it accomplishes. Just had a couple things. As far as building maintenance, I have some notes here I was trying to jot down quick. Completely support. I think that is where the future of the budget is going, with all the buildings we have online and the new technology, and just supporting that. And with our new HVAC systems, it's just something that completely support as we move ahead. State aid, Chapter 70, fingers crossed. I'm hopefully a little more optimistic. I had a couple questions on items as far as health department. Is there anything, and I didn't see any types of increases, but due to COVID, do we expect any increase in expenses or support that they will need? And then I just had a second question on, I see the school expenses due to COVID in the budget, but then I also see the warrant articles. So I'm just trying to align those two and see kind of where the balance is. And then third, is it possible, I went to a couple restaurants over the weekend, and they're still talking about the money that they spent on furniture and items, and that they're still struggling. Is it possible to set up a fund or use some of the money that, if it's a 2-year push into some of these funds that we're talking about, to put it into a fund to help them if they have requests, like we do with the small grant repair program? Okay, I bought this, I bought that, I bought 10 heaters. Can we look to do some type of fund and have them apply to get recoup some of the costs back as far as they're concerned? So 3 long questions.
I think I remember them.
Sorry.
The first is Health and Human Services. They in the COVID article is a request for appropriation for setting up vaccination clinics. Well, we know we're already setting them up. So we're working within the resources we have, and we'll be working with the Finance Committee in if we need a reserve fund transfer to get those clinics. We don't know when they're going to happen right now. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but we don't have the number of vaccines that would allow us to do the robust clinics, the full clinics, although we're doing them daily when we can. So those, but I fully expect that those amounts will be needed in FY21. So we're looking at whether we can use our state and federal funding for that, or whether we need to talk to the Finance Committee about reserve. So that's an example of how what the health department needs might be in this year and not next year. Although there is the continuation of public health nursing support in the quote unquote COVID article that we would need in the next year, because it's been invaluable for us to have the additional staffing. All of the school department's base budget of a 3.9%, 3.6% increase is exclusive of running a hybrid school, changes in busing, and the fully remote academy. All of those expenses have been moved over to this article. So once we know what those expenses really are, then we'll know what the article is. So we don't have to go into the school budget and try to determine what was what. So I think that makes the most sense. The work that we did in terms of providing town resources for businesses, absent special act, we didn't find a way, but we could go back to the table and see if there's something that can be done. But a direct payment to the businesses based on legal counsel without a special act, without CDBG funds, which we don't have, we haven't found a way. But I'm happy to explore whether there is something we can do.
Thank you.
May I speak to that too, Kate? If there were a citizens organization, like a 501c3 established to go after grant money, and to which other people in the town could contribute, that might be a good vehicle for that.
Yes.
And it doesn't have some other constrictions on anything we do with respect to supporting businesses financially. And I know that other towns have done this, and I think there's a place for Needham in that. I think there's a fairly generous population here, even in spite of all of the pressures that everybody's feeling now. So I think we should encourage people to do that.
Or reach out to the chamber and maybe have them look into ways
It's
to.
worth conversations,
contact people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Thank you.
Dan or Mary Ann, do you want to add to the conversation? Dan?
Only to say it's a good and careful piece of work, very complex and a challenging time. So I just wanted to say thanks. Courtesy of the web environment, I've had an opportunity to watch the Finance Committee begin its review of the line items, and there's there's a lot of detail and some careful questioning, and I think we're on, really, I think it's been said, with all of the challenges that we face, we're on a pretty good path, and more work to do, but that's what we're here for. Thanks.
Mary Ann?
And I would just say that I'm grateful that we're at this juncture without the level of concern that we had a year ago. It's still a cautious picture and a picture that we need to be careful about for the citizens of the town, but I think it's still a budget that has our values in it and moves our agenda forward. So I appreciate the thought for that.
Thank you. Needham has a reputation of being a very well-managed town in this state, and this budget reflects the bones of continuing that quality of town life. And we want to thank you for the board, Kate and Dave, for beginning this process for the coming year with this budget proposal. Thank you. Do you have anything else on the budget before we go to we need a motion to recommend it. So does everybody have a copy of the proposed motion? Is there a motion to recommend the approval of the town manager's proposed annual budget for fiscal year 2022?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We come to the vote. Dan?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. So that's unanimous. Thank you.
Mr.
Kate, the
Chairman,
next item is your, John?
I'd
go
like to
ahead.
move the appointments on the consent.
Second.
Any discussion on Mr. Bullion's motion? We come to the vote. Mary Ann?
Aye.
Dan?
Yes. Sorry.
John?
Yes.
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
The chair votes aye. The yeses have it. It's unanimous. The motion passes. That brings us to the next item. Kate, do you want to bring us up to date on this? And there's a motion involved with this as well.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So you've undoubtedly heard that the governor is encouraging private hospitals and entities to set up temporary emergency dispensing sites. And one of these entities has arranged to set up an emergency dispensing site for the COVID-19 vaccine in Needham Crossing. And so we're asking that the board support that site and to ask the Board of Health to determine whether the temporary emergency dispensing site for COVID-19 vaccine at a location in Needham Crossing is an urgent local public health need, so that we could legally put the dispensing site there. And the hope would be that that site, Mr. Chair, would be up and running in a matter of weeks and could accommodate a high volume of Needham residents and surrounding residents, and to complement what we hope to be the town's dispensing site as well. So we do think it's getting the vaccine out is our highest and most critical priority, and we would support this.
Mr. Bullion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the board vote to ask the Board of Health to determine whether a temporary emergency dispensing site for COVID-19 vaccine at a location in Needham Crossing is an urgent local public health need to prevent the spread of the virus and to support Governor Baker's declaration of a state of emergency.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
And I'd just like to state before we begin the discussion, this motion represents a flexible approach to dealing with a national emergency. And it involved the cooperation of all of the town's boards and shows a willingness to look creatively to solve problems on the part of our town administration and all of the other boards in town. So this is a major advance in getting people the vaccines they need. Any other comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's an amazing opportunity, and coming together like we did to get this moved to the Board of Health for their approval, I think is terrific. And now that we're looking at, I think it's tomorrow, it's going to open up for phase 2, right? 75 years and older registrations for after February 1. We're going to see a large influx of people who need it. And it's nice that we're able to pivot. So. Thanks to all involved.
Thanks, Matt. Any other comments from the board? Hearing none, we come to the vote. Mary Ann?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. It's unanimous. Thank you very much, Kate.
Just on that note, Mr. Chair, we have been notified by the Commonwealth that the maximum doses that we'll be receiving is 100 a week, which is significantly fewer than we had expected. And so we will continue to give them out as we can to the people who qualify under the phases, and we continue to push to see if we can, as a large and willing and robust health department, could accommodate a lot more. And so we'll just keep pushing on that. But as you know, this is a national problem. And so I think just to be rest assured that we have the infrastructure set up that we can ramp up as soon as we get the vaccines. And we understand, but we're disappointed that we don't have more than we have.
And for the benefit of the public, there are other options for people. For example, veterans have different options if they're in the VA system. So people should check with their insurer and look for opportunities. The town has, the information is on the town website, and the state has a website also with respect to where vaccine is available. So don't just concentrate on trying to get a shot here in Needham if you have other options because of the limited supply.
Right, and so that's a wonderful point, because on the town's website, on the front page at the very top is the COVID banner, and it takes you to our COVID website, and scroll down into the gold box, and there's a click that says, how to sign up for a vaccine, and it takes you to all the places around us. It takes you to the Commonwealth page, but it shows all the places and what doses they have. And so, we're just telling people to just keep looking and looking at those places that will have doses and that they can sign up for them, starting as Matt said, for over 75 starting next week.
Thank you, Kate. Do you have a town manager's report as well?
I do. I think Mary Ann had something.
Oh,
Can I
go
ask
ahead,
a
Mary Ann.
question? Kate, of the 100 doses, does some portion of those need to be allocated for second doses for people to whom we've given a first dose? Is that where they're going to need to be used?
We've
or-
been told that we will have sufficient doses for all of the original doses. Katie, are you nodding? Yes, that it's in addition to that.
So that's in addition. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before Kate goes to her town manager?
Well, I might add one more thing, Mr. Chair.
Oh,
is
go
that,
ahead.
our intrepid Director of Health and Human Services was able to buy one of those freezers that is ultra cold storage. And so that positions us to possibly be able to get the Pfizer vaccine when that's available. And our building maintenance department had to rewire to get it in, but it's there. And so I can't impress upon enough how all day, every day, all they're thinking about is how to get our residents vaccinated and the wider community too. So that freezer's there. So if we've asked for some of the Pfizer, we get that because we've been only using the Moderna. So just a couple
Thanks.
more things, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I asked Katie to give us an update on the emergency rental assistance program.
Great, thank you. We have gotten an update from the Metro West Collaborative Development. They're our third-party administrator for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So far to date, they have received 30 applications, and of those, 16 have been approved and enrolled in the program. There are 6 that are still in process and remain incomplete, but they're working on those, and the remainder have either withdrawn or are ineligible. To give you a sense of who we're serving, of the 16 enrolled households, those apartments are home to 34 Needham residents, 9 of whom are children, and 6 of the units have occupants who are 55 or older. In terms of racial and ethnic breakdown, 62% of the households are white, 19% are Black. 1 household self-identifies as Asian and 1 as Latino. For bedroom type, 50% of the units are 1 beds, 37% are 2 beds, and 12% are 3 or 4 bedroom units. The average rent that a beneficiary pays per month is just under $2,000. The average assistance that we are providing is $962 per month for 3 months. So in total, for everyone who has been enrolled in the program, to get the maximum benefit over the total 3 months, we have committed to spend $46,188. So as you're all well aware, the total program allocation was $170,000, $120,000 from CPA, and $50,000 from the Foundation for Metro West. So we will be scheduling a meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust in the coming weeks to come back to you with recommendations for ways that we can make changes to the program to make sure that we are maximizing the use of the remaining funds. Happy
Thanks,
to answer any
Katie.
questions.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any questions? Thank you.
I have a few more things. So one is that we had a presentation on the Ridge Hill demolition project, and earlier today, Dave and I met with the project team, and I think we've identified some ways that they're going to take a look at bringing the cost of that project down. One of the things that I think Mr. Borelli had asked is if we could have a bid in hand, but we don't have the funding for the development of the specs. It's in the actual appropriation. So, but I do think the team has a good sense of what we can bring it down. And so when we open the warrant, we'll have close the warrant, we'll have better information for you on the project costs. So, and I think that I really appreciate the board's input on that, and I think it's useful. This week, and I think it would be useful if we could take a look back in COVID, but we had 3 police officers retire this week, and I think it would be great if we could get a list of everybody who had gone during COVID when we couldn't go and say goodbye. But David Eldridge, Carl Harmon, and Tom McNiff were all retiring, and these are names probably very well known to many of you. And so it says something like close to 100 years of service among the 3 of them. So it's really an end of an era. So that's something we want to wish them well, and we're sorry that we can't go to their retirement party. But maybe there'll be one later. And finally, Mr. Chair, I wanted to tell you that today we launched a program called the Needham Mask Challenge, which targets young people and trying to get them to think about wearing their masks and who they're wearing them for. And this is one of the projects that has been ongoing. And so Sandy's going to show us the 30-second video that we've launched today in cooperation with the schools.
I think it's played through. It needs to just go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Need the sound.
Oh, well,
Sorry.
you'll get a good sense. So, Mr. Chair, you'll find it on our website and all our social media. It'll be pushed out a lot of places. We also are distributing this week 2,000 Raffinova face masks with the Needham logo on them. And we're asking people to post on social media with the hashtag @Needham Mask Challenge and tell us who they're wearing their mask for. So just part of our ongoing efforts, particularly with, as you can see in Needham and in many other communities, the number of cases among young people is increasing, and it's just a way to try to get a different message to them than maybe sandwich board signs and stickers that we've been using for shoppers. So, Mr. Chair, that is our report, and be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Excellent, Kate. Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none, we come to the committee reports, and I've had requests for, we have one committee report on the agenda for Needham Unite Against Racism, and then Mr. Matthews is going to be talking to us about stress and a presentation he heard at the Mass Municipal Association meeting this past week. So Mary Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Nuwari Group held their public hearing last night on the vision, guiding principles, and intentional practices We had some 60 attendees who joined us, and a variety of people provided feedback. There was also feedback provided via email and via a form for submitting feedback on the statement. So I would start by saying that people are encouraged to continue to submit feedback. You can do that by going to the Newari website on the town website and clicking the QR code if you'd like to submit feedback that way, or sending us an email. Any of that works. Generally, I would say that the vision was quite well received. There were some suggestions for items to be considered, and some other aspects that people asked us to think about. You know, backward looking focus on acknowledging what had happened, and the vision itself is a forward looking item. After the public hearing, the committee held a discussion of an article on white fragility. The agreement there is that that is a term, along with white supremacy or white privilege, that is probably something that we should talk about more, but that needs to be well defined so that people understand the way in which it's the context that it fits and how they are invited into the conversation. Thinking about white fragility, there was a particular phrase that's in there that talked about building racial stamina, something all of us could benefit from. It's like a muscle, right, that we can learn and work on. The last piece of the meeting last night was a discussion of our schedule. So we did have a discussion where we said we are clearly trying to accomplish way too much in way too tight a time frame. So we talked about what we would like to get done before town meeting in the spring, and the way that the work might extend into year number 2. It's important for everybody to get through sort of all the basic pillars. We've talked about housing and education and policing and staffing, you know, et cetera, and some community issues. So until we get through all of those, we don't feel that we're really in a position to set what the work plan is for year 2. But we will get there, and we'll be able to define for town meeting what our plan is going forward. So more to come. We're grateful for those who came last night. We're grateful for the feedback we received. And we look forward to having a vision statement that we can bring to this board at the February 9th meeting, looking for approval from the board so that we can give it to other committees and ask them to consider how that's going to impact their work and can be adopted to guide their work as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mary Ann. And Matt Borelli is also a member of Newari and has some comments.
Great. And that was an excellent summary, Mary Ann. And I think, you know, you summed up exactly what we did last night and what we received. I guess, you know, just my comments to it. We did receive comments kind of supportive of exactly what the committee's doing, then some hesitation, which you might have heard last night or watching. The hesitation I just have, and I think it was mentioned in one of the comments, is that some of the terms that we can use, you know, we're looking for buy-in here, and some of the labeling that we might use or arguments, or, you know, might to some be offensive and have the opposite effect of actually a group that the idea is to have unity and have to buy in and to move forward. So I think sometimes the labeling, while it's good in certain contexts, when it's coming from town and town leadership, can have an effect that's not intended. I want to be careful as we move forward that we have, and I think we all do, use the correct language to get the buy-in and not the finger pointing and back and forth. That's more of a debate than something that I think our whole goal here is to move forward ahead and not be in these squabbles about terminology and what it means to some and what it means to others. So I think the labeling can have a detrimental effect, and I just want to make sure that you know, we have that in mind, and I know that's what we're going to talk about next week. So otherwise, it was a good meeting.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think most of us were there in one way or another. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, just yeah, as you say, Mr. Chairman, even those of us that aren't in the room are watching, and frankly, quite glad that those that are in the room are there and at it, because as you can tell just from this discussion, it's not it's not easy work. It's new material and very challenging for a lot of those who are involved. But it's necessary, and I think, it's necessary to do this in a way that brings as much of the community along as we can. And I agree with Matt to that extent, but we also have to be very thoughtful and inclusive of a lot of voices that haven't been able to get to the table at some times in the past. This is a rare window of opportunity in my experience for us to make real progress on these issues. And I appreciate everything that you're doing, and we look to see. And my hope and expectation is that after your committee approves the vision statement, that it can come here for adoption by this board. And so, yes, it's very careful and detailed work. It is. I don't know how many of those that are watching this program have been watching the Nuari meetings, but it is difficult work, and I thank everybody that's been involved.
Thank you, Dan. Echo that. Mary Ann?
Mo, I actually was remiss in not thanking the committee again, because I do think it is work that is challenging, particularly in Zoom. It is work that is familiar for many on the committee, because we are talking about the lives that they're living and how they're relating to the community. And I think it has permitted them to give voice to what their hopes and aspirations are for our community to be a welcoming community. But I am grateful for them putting themselves out there and sharing candidly, thoughtfully, carefully for the community, for a better Needham to be a better place. So I do want to say thank you to them, and thank you to Lisa Smith-McQueenie, who has been our facilitator. Really important to the work.
Yes, when we began this effort, we acknowledged that these were going to be difficult discussions, and anybody watching those meetings knows that those are difficult discussions, and you've done a great job chairing it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Dan, you had a report from MMA for us.
Yeah, I did. We, as most of us, were involved to one extent or another in this weekend's Mass Municipal Association conference, which is really always a terrific statewide program, and includes both opportunities to kind of compare notes with officials from from other communities, and comparable and things that we might not think are comparable but are, and as well as some really engaging and informative seminars, and including, along the lines that we were talking about, a number of programs that were focused on race equity and diversity and inclusion elements of public policy. So this is something that every community is working on in its own way, and a lot, and making some good progress, I think. But also we're coming up against there are challenges too. We had one seminar talked about the beginning to kind of unpack the new police reform bill that's been enacted, which I think it was important to get done, but even the people that did it recognize it's imperfect, and it's going to need additional work, particularly, and there's a study on civil service, which has been a focus for our town and working on trying to get diversity in hiring in our public safety. So, but one program that was particularly interesting and helpful to me was talked about the workplace environment in the COVID era, which, of course, being local government, it focused on local government, but it really made clear to me something that I think is pretty obvious to a lot of people that work in town halls and city halls every day, which is, we're in almost a year into the COVID governance environment with the remote and the hybrid and all the different kinds of stresses and changes that brings. And we feel the problems ourselves, and we work with individuals who are under stress of various kinds. But it isn't just individuals, it's more that it's an endemic condition throughout society of people that are under greater stress, great increases in degrees and cases of anxiety and depression. I was talking, in fact, with the chairman. He said that dentists are reporting a significant increase in people cracking with cracked teeth as a result of grinding them in their sleep. There's a lot of just day-to-day wear on people that we need to all be mindful of. And when I say we, I mean everybody that's affected, which is all of us, the managers, the staff, the customers, both in our public sector and in the private sector. We've managed through this, as we talked about in the budget and everything else now, for close to a year. We've got another 4 months or so to go before we really start to kind of come out of the tunnel, hopefully, with this. The weather improves and the public health regimen works better and vaccination becomes more widespread. But we really need to stick to the program and stay patient and persistent and listen to each other during that time. And I think that if we do, we will all be better for it. And I just hope that, and we often talk about, well, isn't it terrible that people do this or that they're not following the masking rules or whatever. I think we need to kind of work to turn that around a little and say, isn't it good how hard people are working on this? And let's keep it up. Thank you.
Thanks. Marianne? You need to unmute.
Yep. Mr. Chair, I think this relates to the budget. I've been struck actually by the tenor of some of the conversation on Facebook that says, well, town hall is empty, so nobody's working. So what am I paying taxes for? And the answer is, just as in every workplace across America, people are working. I mean, you can look at the pictures here, with who's where. So people are making their choices. People are working from home. People are working 24 hours a day because everything is now remote and you're always on a device.
Right.
It is not fair to say to town hall that people are not working, just like it's not fair that your workplace is not working, or I presume their workplace is not working. At least mine is still working. So, I just think we need to be a little bit generous with everybody who's trying to balance everything from wherever they are right now, and acknowledge that we are all working, and that is your taxes are still at work, even though you cannot see everybody in town hall. You are able to get your business done.
Thank you for saying that, Marianne. It's absolutely true. Matt?
And I would say, to echo that, to town business and business, private business, people are much more isolated and they're working from their homes and they're not interacting with their colleagues and they're not seeing each other like they used to. And I even talk to town employees. That is a big deal, not being in town hall and being able to interact and kind of have those light moments as well as those heavy moments. So I think we have to keep that in mind, and that adds to stress. And Dan, I really appreciate you bringing up this topic because it is hidden behind everything that's going on right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further business before us, or anybody have any closing remarks before we have a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
That brings us to the vote, unless there's any discussion on that motion. Marianne?
Aye.
Dan?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. It is unanimous. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all, and thank you, Kate and Dave, and Sandy and Kate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Be well and be safe.